Hi, everybody. Welcome to the last panel in the Film Music Media 2023 Symposium series. My name is Kai Savas, and I'm here with another amazing panel of guests. This time we are focusing a lot on post-production and getting people from different fields of expertise to talk about the collaborative process, working with composers, working with music, working with the edit, all in post-production. So please join me in welcoming our guests. First up, he is an additional music composer and score mixer known for his work on Hunters. Please welcome Forrest Christenson. Hey, Forrest. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks.
Next up, she is the music supervisor for Heartbreak and Okja. Please welcome Jemma Burns. Hey, Jemma. Thanks so much for joining. Next, he is a sound designer, supervising sound editor, re-recording mixer, and founder of This Is Sound Designer Studios, known for his work on Joyland and the Voyeurs. Please welcome Nathan Ruyle.
Hey, everybody.
And last but not least, she is the editor behind The Integrity of Joseph Chambers. Please welcome Yvette Amirian. Hey, Yvette. And thank you so much for joining us, everybody. I want to jump in and talk to Forrest. Let's jump in and talk to you first. In the thriller crime series Hunters, you worked alongside composer Rupert Gregson-Williams to provide additional music cues and mixing. And I'm curious, what does that collaborative process look like, and how does it help bring the world of Hunters to life?
Yeah, sure. So I've been, working with Rupert for several years. I first worked with him back in 2017 when I co-mixed Wonder Woman. After that, I took a job with him as his technical assistant, and I worked for him for 5 years. That brought me to a point where we could work together on, I could do additional cues. We actually ended up co-scoring something. But Hunters was like one of these shows where I was able to get involved on the music composing side, but also at the end, sort of shaping the sonics of it during the score mix.
Yeah.
So it was a cool. I mean, I've done that with him on several projects, so we have a shorthand, which has been really exciting, and I've been able to bring that to my work with other composers now. Hunters was special because it has these this sort of uniquely quintessential villain who is Hitler. You can just be as villainous and evil with the music as you want to be, and
right.
you can't go too far with it. So that was just so fun to do that motif, and try to find a way to just get it as gritty and dark as possible for that character. We scored in Vienna to the orchestra and the choir. They did a beautiful job. They make my life a lot easier. Just getting the recordings from there. And there was some sort of adventure, almost James Bond-like adventure themes for the Hunters as they're traveling the globe on this quest to locate Hitler. So it's almost surprising to me at first, this suddenly this orchestra coming out of the TV show where there's a lot of synth, but then it becomes this adventurous mode almost for the show, which is a really fun touch. And then there was the choir, which Rupert is amazing with choral composing. That's
he's fantastic.
His background in choral music.
He was a choir boy, I believe, when he was growing up, right? Along with
right.
Harry and
They have that background, and so you can tell when you're listening to this choral orchestration, and it's really featured, and and also a little bit aleatoric experimental choir stuff as well. Which in terms of the orchestration and writing, became very interesting to explore. So
yeah.
Yeah, just
I
a
mean,
show
Rupert,
of
yeah,
like
I love Rupert's music. He's, I mean, fantastic. And
yeah,
I know his brother and I know him, and he's all the way on in like the English countryside though, right? In London, like he likes his solitude over there.
yeah, yeah. He's got a beautiful place. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I,
Oh, sorry, go ahead if you had any. Yeah.
oh, I was just going to say I envy how his cottage life.
Yes, his cottage life.
Very very peaceful.
Absolutely. Well, Gemma, I want to jump over to you. As a music supervisor, how would you describe the difference between working with composers on orchestral works versus on soundtracks that have a cohesive sound between the score and songs in the project?
Well, I thought I might just take a step back and just maybe start by describing how many different roles a music supervisor can actually inhabit.
Yeah, because I think
like
yeah, people don't really know exactly the
yeah,
depth
I mean,
of what you work with. Yeah.
so I mean, different projects have vastly different needs. It depends on how the director likes to work. Some directors, they just give me a shopping list of songs that they want me to clear. Some directors get me involved from like years before the project's even up. We're discussing the tone of the music and whatnot. And also some music supervisors really specialize in working with the score composer and being involved in all the orchestration and the recording and all that sort of side of things. I sort of fall in the middle. I tend to predominantly sort of set the tone with the director, maybe suggest what composer might be right for the project. And then, of course, during the process, we're all giving feedback on the cues and whatnot, but I'm not super involved in the actual recording side of things necessarily. Occasionally I am with certain composers, but not so much with orchestral work. But yeah, of course, it's wonderful when you can have a cohesive sound that's created by very collaborative relationship between the composer and the music supervisor. I've sort of formed a few unofficial little teams that I like to work with on different projects depending on what their needs are. And but I think it's wonderful when there is that cohesion, because quite often on films I actually have very little to do with the composer as well. And
Right.
I mean, once again, it really depends on the needs of the film. But I tend to work most closely with composers personally when either the composer and or the director aren't super experienced. Because, being a music supervisor, I've done, over 100 projects, whereas, obviously a director maybe their first project, their first feature or whatnot. So they're really looking for guidance. And I find my role is frequently to sort of interpret what the director needs, what the director's trying to say, and what the film needs, and somehow filter that through to the composer in a way that they understand, as well as sort of nutting out specific cues in more detail. But yeah, that's sort of, does that sort of answer your question?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I always find it fascinating how music supervisors, like, I think some people might have this like closed-minded view that they just like pulling up their iTunes playlist and just handing it over, but it's such a in-depth like process that you have to go through, and how you can, and the role just varies so differently. I've heard music supervisors, it's just so different, vastly on the composer, the director, and
some music supervisors don't have a creative bone in their body. And I'm not saying that as a diss, but
no, absolutely. Some people maybe are just the iTunes list, maybe that is
whereas I studied film, and that's what I'm in it for,
yeah, exactly.
Collaborating with the team and trying to nut out the most evocative way to tell the story is a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. No. Well, Nathan, I want to jump over to you. You're currently working with composers Catherine and Kim Kluge. What is their creative process like, and how do you incorporate sound design in both conceptual and practical ways throughout the project?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, I'm in a unique position because most of the projects that I work on, I'm both a supervising sound editor, designer, and a mixer. And I'm actually sitting here in my own mix stage here in Burbank. And so, the process that I and my team work on is pretty integrated. And so, we're usually starting pretty early and more, and even in pre-production, because we're working with directors over and over again. Catherine and Kim are sort of famous. They worked on Martin Scorsese's film Silence, and they actually were denied the opportunity to be nominated for an Academy Award because their musical compositions were deemed included too much sound design, and so therefore the music was considered not it wasn't score enough to be a score. Which to me is a really exciting, because the way that I approach sound as a sound designer and a mixer is, it's not this kind of walled off, fenced off way of thinking about it. We're dealing with sound in both music, music as this kind of organized sound, and also sound design, which we're also often thinking about musically. And I think the best sound for movies is when these things are hybridizing and talking to each other and informing each other. And so, this project I'm working on with Catherine and Kim, we're sort of hitting the ground from day one, thinking about that. And so, for instance, once we had spotted the movie all together and kind of recognized some of the themes for the music and the motifs and the emotional arcs and different reoccurring, this particular movie has a lot of reoccurring kind of motifs and moments. Then we started to talk about sounds that relate to objects, sounds that relate to characters, things like a character's high heels, or that's a one instance, or another character who has a specific object that they that has a sonic aspect to it through the movie. And so then what I did is I went in and created some design for those specific sounds, and then they took those sounds and they're actually going to be working with those to incorporate them into the score. So they're thinking about how can these sonic elements become like samples in their palette of sounds. Some of the sounds were environmental sounds, for instance. So they're thinking from day one about how they can start to incorporate the sound design palette into their work, and then vice versa. Once they're starting to create these compositions that are conscious and sometimes directly kind of interfacing with the sound design, then we're also going to let that kind of reinform us about, well, how does the sound design become, in moments where maybe in this particular movie there's memory and flashbacks, how then that can inform the way the sound design is going to kind of operate within the movie. So it's in one way it's a kind of obvious approach, but it's also one that's very innovative and new, because oftentimes we're so separated in how we work. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I know. I love. I mean, that's the whole the beauty of it is find those paths, crossing those paths, and sometimes the Oscars with their strict rules, I always like, how do you put like there's no rule to how to make something creative, it's just like if you want to do something and do it. Like I don't like sometimes when they put those things in these boxes. I remember back a few years ago, and they wouldn't nominate anybody more than 2 composers on a cue sheet. Now thankfully we have multiple composers getting nominated for score and stuff like that.
And there's still no music supervision category.
Yeah, I know.
Right,
and the guild. I'm glad that the Music Supervisors Guild does what they're doing and trying to bring some, shining light to your work. Jemma. So it's
quite frustrating every year to see all my colleagues getting nominated, because I tend to work on projects where everyone gets nominated, and I'm like, oh wow, and everyone asks me if I'm going to various award ceremonies. I'm like, I'll be cheering from my living room.
Right. I know it's such there's that political thing with the with awards.
Well, it's about whether or not you've created original content, and I do often commission songs. But anyway, that's I don't want to moan. It's just it's a little frustrating.
But Nathan, I'm curious, where in Burbank are you? Because I work at Cartoon Network Studios, and I'm right there in the.
Oh yeah, we're just down the street. We're right where Victory curves from going north, south, to east, west. Here.
Oh, nice, perfect. Yeah. I know. I think La La Land Records is somewhere around that corner bend. But
yeah. My company's called This Is Sound Design, and we have a facility here with several stages. Everything's in house, so we work all in house Foley, ADR, mixing, etc.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm on the East Coast right now, but me and my wife used to live right in the foothills, right above Glen Oak. So but we're coming back in July. We'll be back in town in July. So, but Yvette, I want to jump over to you now. I want to take it over to you, because as an editor, your role working alongside composers looks different than that of someone in the music department. So, what does that collaboration process typically look like, and how critical is it to the overall tone of the project?
Yeah, so I'll say that it depends on the project that I'm working on. It depends a lot
Right.
on how the director likes to work. I come from a background where at one point I was doing a lot of documentary features, and especially very music-driven documentaries. Like I did one for Amazon about Mary J. Blige. So that obviously involved a different set of, specific music supervision, because we were utilizing so many of her songs in
Right.
conjunction with a composer. One of the things that tends to happen a lot in documentaries and unscripted content is you as the picture editor are also, if not the music editor and sound editor, at least you're laying the groundwork for what the pace and tone of that project is going to sound like. So I have a significant amount of that experience, and I've often received the comment from my mixers and sound designers who take over the project that I've done so much of that. So for me, making that transition into narrative projects and narrative features was different in that I had to let go of a lot of that. And so that process and those projects specifically, my role is usually what I'll do is I will be acquainted with the sound designers and composer early on if they're already on board. Sometimes they aren't, they come in a little bit later into the picture, getting from them a temp library of things that they've either already been working on specifically for the project, or a library of songs that they may have had from previous projects that I could use to then sort of try to build the pace and the tone of what the movie will eventually sound like. And then as those cues start to filter in, being able to replace those and sound design elements as well, especially if it's a sound design heavy project that requires specific types of sonic elements. And then of course, at the tail end of the project, once we're locked, or maybe in some cases, even when we're soft locked, trying to, start that process of spotting, seeing where those cues are going to come in and out. And then obviously being able to be a part of the final mix. So I'm not involved as a picture editor. I'm not involved in the creation of that sound design or the actual creation of the music, but I do have a lot of communication that occurs with the sound designer and the composer, and then ultimately being present in the mix for what that final sound is going to be like.
Wow, that's so much. But there's so many people involved in your process as well, but that anchoring around you, that's incredible.
I find editors are often sort of music supervising as well, in a sense. Like I often have very close relationships with editors. Sometimes I feel like editors, there's a bit like stepping on each other's toes, because the editors have been working with the pictures so closely and trying out different music, and then when someone else comes along and goes, well, I think we should try this, it can be, I have had some fraught moments, to be honest, but generally if it's a good a collaborative team, and there's also a music editor who's in like a project I've just been working on for a long time that's in New York. The picture editor and the director are working away. Me and the music editor are working away at looking at cues, and then she's in the room with them, and we're sort of filtering through. But it's very, very collaborative, isn't it? Oftentimes,
I mean, I have many editors I've worked with now on a dozen projects. In fact, like directors often make maybe a feature every 3 or 4 years, and but I have a couple editing collaborators. I have editor collaborators who I've done a dozen movies with over the last 5 years, and the same with music editors, and in some cases music supervisors in a few groups that I work with. So oftentimes we end up being all the composers are kind of coming and going, because again, they're working less frequently, but the kind of everyone who's here in this group, I have many collaborators I work with 3-4 times a year now, which is really, really cool.
Same.
But when we start to develop a shorthand and a way of working, and it's I think it's not only is it great because it develops our creative process, because we get to like try things out, and we try to learn how the editor knows how I like to have things temped, and also brings new ideas that maybe we're iterating from one project to the next especially when we work with the same director over a few projects. So we're all developing a shorthand together, and there's so much going on between the picture edit and the sound edit and the music, and so it's I think it's one of the things that I'm really thrilled to be able to open my own facility, because I'm that facilitates this kind of like ongoing collaboration. And it's one of the reasons I did this, is so that I could build up these relationships over a career.
How long?
And also, Sorry.
I was wondering how long you've had your business open.
Well, this is the third facility that I've had. So it's been about 10 years, but this is the first that's only my company. I shared it with another company previously. So yeah, and we've been here about 3 years.
That's
Oh,
awesome.
wow, congrats. That's awesome.
I was
Thanks.
just
Yeah.
going to add to what you were saying before about, having a shared, shorthand and whatnot. It's also I find often working with the new team, you're kind of trying to figure out what their sensibility is as well, their aesthetic sensibility, and how far you can push things, how weird you can go, how mainstream it's going to be. And once you've worked with someone a bunch of times, I think that's obviously why they return to, especially the creatives in the team, because you just know that you get each other on a sensibility, something that's quite intangible, but you know that you're on the same page. And that's so important because especially as a creative, it's quite frustrating to work with someone who just sees the world so differently.
Right.
Yeah.
100%. Well, I want to jump to a question that will go around the room and get everyone's perspective. I know thank you for sharing kind of a bit of your world and some of the projects you worked on. So you might have touched on this a little bit, but in your experiences, I mean, and this may be a nice platform to toot your own horn a bit, but what is the most crucial skill that you bring to the table in your own field that other people, that people have to rely on you for, what you're bringing to the collaborative process and as part of the team, post-production team that you're bringing to, and how do you integrate that skill into your collaboration with composers? So something that a composer would definitely rely on you for. Forrest, why don't you kick us off?
Sure thing. Well, I would just say that I sort of have a split personality in my career, which is that, I do composing, but also mixing.
Right.
And sometimes I do these with the same collaborators, and sometimes not. But I think that on either side, being able to do the other thing is what makes me desirable to do the other one. So like if I'm mixing a score, my background as a composer and my understanding of like the perspective of my client as a composer and like the musical, their musical speak, and like just understanding their music and their whole process up to this point helps me to create a good mix for them. And then likewise, when I'm composing, having those mixing skills and like feeding those into that product, just hopefully makes things sound better. So, that just having that like that multi thing happening means that I have my focus is like always like what am I doing, but at the same time they're very helpful to each other. So
they're very definitely complement each other for sure. Jemma, how about yourself? I mean you also talked about how it depends on the director and the composer, so I'm curious, what are they relying on you for, and what are you bringing to the table when you're working, especially with a composer?
Well, with the composer, it's kind of what I mentioned earlier about having worked with so many directors and on so many projects, and as I said, having a film background and having studied film, it's really about interpreting what the film needs, and having sourced so many songs and worked with so many cues over the years. Like, of course, it really varies from director to director, but I feel like I've sort of developed an inherent sensibility around the most effective way to tell the story. And so I'm sort of oftentimes interpreting what the director's trying to get through to the composer, but also the directors lean, a lot of incredible directors have terrible taste in music. And sometimes their ideas a bit really on the nose or whatever. It really varies, but they sort of rely on me to also to have my finger on the pulse in terms of, say something like Heartbreak, which I'll probably speak about later, but, the directors aren't necessarily that in touch with what the Zoomer high school kids are listening to or whatever it is. I have to sort of act as an expert in whatever genre we're dealing with. And so the director really leans on me to be able to come up with the best possible examples of that world of music.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, because I think
how do you
music
stay in touch with
supervision.
that? Like you mentioned how directors would know, like, so are you constantly, I mean, immersed in this world where you are looking at what's the new trends, what are the big artists, what are
Yeah,
the smaller indie
fortunately, I
artists,
haven't.
like,
Yeah, no, definitely. And look, it's more and more these days. I find it is actually, it's not that hard if you put your mind to it to find out what's going on in different worlds. But I'm sort of a young 40 something. I'm very I'm just in touch with all the young kids' music anyway. I just love it myself. So, but obviously there'll be certain projects where they're, you know, like for example, when I worked on Lion, you know, we needed a lot of Bollywood music, and sure, I knew a bit about it, but on each, that's one of the fun parts of the job is, you know, each project, I kind of have to do a deep dive into that world of music and find out what are the most incredible artists that we could use, and you know, so that the director feels safe to lean on me for that information, you know, for that resource. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Nathan, how about yourself?
Well, you know, I feel as a sound designer, which is less related to music in some ways, but I think in some other ways more important is that, you know, I was very lucky to get to do my MFA at Cal Arts and really came at this from a design perspective, which is a little bit unusual in the industry. I studied design, and I learned to have a discourse around design with collaborators, and that really informs everything I do. And so, you know, I think on that side, the greatest asset that I have is that, you know, I think about, I come at it as you know, what does the movie sound like, and in a larger kind of way. So it's not really about solving technical problems or an engineering issue, or it's really about kind of the larger idea of what does the movie sound like, and then everything that happens with Foley and design and dialogue editing, everything else is coming from that conversation. And I think that's my strongest asset, is I can sit down in the stage, the spotting session with the composer, with the director, with the editor, and we can have a real conversation about creatively what we're going to do with the movie. And I think that's a little bit unique actually in the industry. You know, but then, you know, as a person who mixes, you know, mixing is kind of it in a lot of ways, it's kind of the pinnacle of the technical part of the exercise. But actually for me, it's as much about that design idea and bringing those ideas through to the end of the process. And you know, that really is a huge part of it, that is with the music. And you know, if we've done it all right, and we've had the kind of collaboration that I try to have on every project, you know, that last few weeks in the stage, we're realizing all these ideas in a tangible way, that we're actually experiencing them in the stage. And you know, I feel like I'm at the point in my career, I'm sure the other folks here too, you know, I'm now in 15 years in, and you know, I'm the most thrilling thing is when I know that idea that we had that was a purely conceptual that day when we spotted the movie, to be experiencing it together in the stage in that last week is just a really powerful thing. And that's, you know, that's what I feel like I can bring that. And I love experiencing that, to be like, it wasn't just an idea, we can actually realize it here. And my role as a mixer is a big part of that, because you have to be able to create that final experience with the material, that it works and it clicks in and it feels right and it sounds right. So I think that's a good articulation of it for me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yvette, how about yourself? What do you bring to the table that the music and the composer that they do not have from an editing standpoint that they really need?
Sure. Well, I mean, from an editing standpoint, one of the things I think that makes me unique as far as, because we have to deal both with picture and sound. That's something I'm constantly thinking about, and as I'm crafting it, pacing it, because of my background, I often have to deal with material that, like, the story literally does not exist. I have to produce it, I have to create it, I have to craft it, and so much of that comes from what I do with the sound, how I pace it, what kind of music I'm using, what kind of sound design I'm using. So because I had to do so much of that myself in the documentary world, I think that gives me, or so I've been told, I guess, but a lot of people will sort of look at the way that I craft my sequences. I remember I was sitting with a director recently, and she was like, "Why are you checkerboarding?" And I was like, why not? Like, that's the way that I cut. I like to smooth things out. I don't like black holes in my audio. I like everything to be full. I like there to be backgrounds. I mean, there are directors who can watch things very rough, and I always kind of go into my assemblies with that understanding. Are you okay with watching things rough? Are you okay with watching things unfinished? But there are people who just can't do it. Their brains can't process it. They have to be able to see it all kind of smoothed out. So that's just the way that I work. I smooth from the very beginning. I think a lot about my sound design. I think a lot about the elements that I'm missing that are going to help bring it to life. And what's hard for us is, I know eventually you're going to strip it out and start from scratch, right? Or, you know, maybe you're going to keep pieces of it, or like I said, sometimes you use it as a little bit of a roadmap in terms of how we've pasted or where something is specifically supposed to hit, or, you know, drop down or whatever. And I've been fortunate in the relationships that I've had with those composers and sound designers that they take my ideas into account, and we talk about it during spotting sessions and things like that. But yeah, that's one of the hard things for me, is because I like having my hands in that and sort of relinquishing control, and knowing that there are people that I trust who are going to take over and make it just incredible. It's really fun. And like Nathan was saying, that collaborative part of it, I mean, that's the best part of what we do, isn't it? So
yeah, absolutely. Well, I do want to jump back into some of everyone's individual projects. You know, we have to mention, of course, the biggest series streaming right now, The Last of Us. Forrest, you provide additional score arrangements and programming for composer Dave Fleming in the show, which Dave is a friend of mine. He co-composes with Gustavo Santaolalla. So what differences are taken from the video game itself, and how do you bring fresh sounds to the material?
Yeah, that was such a fun project, and I'm so glad that Dave asked me to be a part of it. Yeah, I mean, obviously we're very inspired by the video game score.
Yeah.
And you know, I had some very deep listening sessions to it to get into the vibe for this. And then, you know, but you know, there's just, we really wanted to put a fresh spin on it, of course. And what it really came down to was just tons of experimentation and sound. Like finding new ways to process my violin, for instance. This was a big part of what I was doing.
Wow.
You know, Dave would write a string line. What can we do with this? I would sort of try to play it in, multi-layer it, add all kinds of weird effects, and just figure out what sounded the creepiest, or what sounded the boldest, or the most interesting. And we just had tons of experimentation like this through the whole process, and Dave's just a joy to work with.
Oh yeah, Dave's one of the most easiest laid back guys I know. But was it interesting to work, because I know, you know, it's a unique situation where Gustavo and him didn't work directly collaborative. You know, Gustavo has material from the game that was rearranged for the show, and new material done by him, and Dave kind of filled in as an additional composer / co-composer in certain episodes. Was it hard to find that, I guess, that to make it cohesive and blend? Because you said you did a lot of listening and deep diving on the score. So what were you pulling from Gustavo's music to make sure that, you know, it did feel like a cohesive world sonically and musically? It's a very similar situation to the way the second game was composed. Matt Quayle, who I know did the in-game music, and Gustavo did the cutscenes, and his in-game score completely different than what Gustavo's kind of, you know, work was.
No, and that's part of what, you know, that's part of what we were inspired by as well, as Matt Quayle's work.
Yeah,
which is amazing, and you know, more synth focused.
Absolutely.
And you know, we took that into consideration as well.
No, it's the show is fantastic, and I can't wait to see how they continue the last few episodes and they adapt from the game.
Yeah, I'm very happy with that. Everyone seems to be enjoying it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Yvette, you recently edited the film The Integrity of Joseph Chambers. How did you work with both the composer and sound designer to influence the sound mixing process?
So the sound design of the movie is a really significant part of it. For anybody who's seen it or even just read reviews about it, our sound designer is Peter Albrechtsen, who is really well known in the sound community, and received a lot of accolades for his last collaboration with Robert Machoyan, our director, on a film for Neon called The Killing of Two Lovers. And so their process is that they think about sound really early on, as early as, Robert working on the script. So there were certain elements that we had talked about, for example, the story is mostly about a man who goes on a hunting adventure gone awry, and so he's alone in the woods for a significant period of time, and it's a very quiet film. There's not a lot going on, so we talked a lot about the editorial process of filling that space with just having it be overwhelmed by the sounds of the forest sort of eating him alive, because he's this little person in this big landscape. So that was something that we talked about a lot, and there were moments where he's supposed to sort of be imagining a baseball game or imagining laughter or applause. And so those were things that we talked about, but didn't necessarily execute in the offline editing, just sort of tempted in to see, will this even work? Is this idea going to sing? And then, laying in sort of like I was saying, the way that I normally cut, laying in the basic sound effects. If you hear a gun, if you see a gun, shoot, you're going to hear it. If you see a car door close, you're going to hear it. All those things I do, during my offline process. Our situation was a little bit unique in that Peter is based in Denmark and our composer is up north, and I'm in LA and Robert was in Utah. So we were, and it was during the pandemic. So we did a lot of things, obviously remotely, but, thankfully due to the technology and, all that, we were able to make it work. It required a couple of Peter was limited on time. So he did his sort of first pass once we had a kind of a soft lock, and then kicked it back to us. And then based on that, we made more changes, and then kicked it back to him. And then based on that, made more changes. So it was we went from a little bit of a fatter cut to trimming it down, maybe cutting scenes now that we had a sense of where that sound design and music was going to go. Peter and Will worked very, very closely together to craft the sound of the film. If you listen to his other film, which actually didn't have any music at all, it was, Peter did all of the music and sound design himself on the last film. And it feels very much like you can't quite tell what's the diegetic sound, what's the music, what's what's coming from the world of the film, what's in his head. Right. So that's a big part of what the story is. So I feel really fortunate to have worked with both of them. They did such a phenomenal job with the film. So being able to have sort of this much heavier version of it, have it come back to me so that Robert and I could, based on that, say, okay, now this is too heavy-handed. This scene maybe doesn't need to be here. Maybe we need to switch things out. And being able to do that a few times with them, and then ultimately ending up in Denmark for our final mix, which I was able to be a part of.
So. Wow, that's incredible.
Peter does mostly documentary work, so I'm sure that's also interesting how that informs his work and narrative.
Yeah, he does. He's actually done, I know he's done, he did Robert's last feature, and I know that he's done a bunch of other features, if I'm not mistaken, in Denmark. I don't know exactly what his resume reads, but I know that he has done a lot of big documentary features.
Yeah,
I think him and Robert specifically for this style of film, they took a very unique approach, and it definitely feels a lot like the other one, and I think that was something that they wanted to kind of continue as a through line.
Wow, I think I think an editor's brain is a unique thing, because the way you organize things and the way you speak about it, it's just so succinct and precise. And yeah, I think that just shows your skill sets right there, just the way you just even review what you talk about. But Jemma, I want to jump over to you. What were your goals as you mentioned before for Heartbreak High? So what were your goals as the music supervisor for the Netflix series Heartbreak High, and what environment were you aiming to create through the music choices?
Well, you guys may not know, because I don't think the original series was big in America, but it was actually a very cult show in the 90s, similar to Degrassi Junior High, around the rest of the world. And it was very edgy, and it was known for that, at the time. So with this new series, like the script and the characters are all so savvy and smart. I just really wanted to make sure that the music we used was music that the characters would actually listen to, and not some sort of millennial or boomer idea of what the kids are down with. So that was super important. And of course, just not underestimating the intelligence of either the kids or the viewers, so we really went to town on making sure that the music was super authentic, and that meant delving into scenes, which I am actually already pretty interested in myself anyway. But there's a whole episode that takes place at the Sydney's famous for the gay and lesbian Mardi Gras, and they'll go to a sissy ball, like a voguing ballroom scene event. So delving into all the sort of big underground queer artists from Sydney and elsewhere. You know, it's a very specific scene, which I love.
Yeah.
And, you know, well, I have to say that, like, while that's always sort of, I'm always looking out for opportunities for diverse artists, working a project like this, I didn't even really have to make much of an effort. Like, half of the artists we used were either, you know, non-binary, brown, whatever, you know, it just wasn't even an issue. Like, I mean, there's so many incredible electronic artists out there who aren't cis, white, male, middle class, you know, all the rest of it.
Right.
There's also a whole scene in Western Sydney, which is kind of the equivalent of South Central LA, I suppose. It's huge a scene of underground, like, drill and trap artists who are, like, massive in the UK and elsewhere, and they're all you know, mostly Asian or Pacific Islanders, and you know, they've got billions of streams on the platforms, but they don't get represented in the mainstream media at all. So I just saw it as a great opportunity to, you know, it's very authentic to the world of the story, but also, you know, just constantly conscious of trying to give opportunities to artists that aren't really getting them in that way. Yeah, so that was really a very that was my main driving force in the
Wow.
production. And I, you know, obviously I had to you know, battle it out a little bit with some of the creatives involved, whether it's, you know, directors or network people or whatever, who, you know, had a very strong idea about what they thought the music would be, but I had to stick to my guns and, you know, about what the kids are actually listening to. You know, they don't listen to Justice at a sissy ball, you know, it's a very specific beat, it's a very specific scene, you know, but fortunately the main creatives involved were absolutely on the same page with me. So yeah,
That's great.
it was really
support
fun.
Yeah, support from everybody. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it was super fun.
Yeah. So Nathan, I want to go over to you. You know, you talked about your studio. This is sound design, and we got a little insight about your history with it in Burbank. So I'm just curious. You know, you just opened a theatrical Atmos stage, and I'm a huge lover of Dolby Atmos. I used to be projectionist, so presentation is really big for me. I have my Dolby Atmos setup here at home, actual Dolby Atmos speakers, not a sound bar or anything like that. So I'm curious, specifically, what's the importance of Dolby Atmos, specifically for a re-recording mixer, and how does that affect your creative process?
Yeah, one of the, you know, like I said, I had a few facilities over the years, and, you know, building out this new space, we built this out of a warehouse in Burbank, so we started from scratch, and so we could really make some decisions. Yeah, I'm actually sitting in our Atmos stage right now. This is a theatrical Atmos stage. It has 32 full range surround speakers. It's you know, and when we built this stage, the idea was to make something that was you know, not gigantic, because, you know, when we're doing bigger budget movies, we often go up to one of the stages in Hollywood. But what I really wanted to be able to do was mix medium budget movies and smaller movies, and really be able to incorporate Dolby Atmos into our workflow, not just as like something we go to the stage for a week and then, you know, are able to throw some things into some speakers, but actually be able to work from day one. Because we actually have two Atmos stages here. One's a broadcast and one's a theatrical. We can actually start building that into the sound design process from day one. And, you know, it's huge for music. We just finished a big budget historical epic, and they recorded it with the orchestra in Italy that worked with Morricone, and, you know, it was a full 100-piece orchestra and a choir. And, you know, to be able to bring that material back, and then in this stage where it's a full theatrical Atmos, and we don't have time to get into what makes a difference between a theatrical Atmos and a regular home theater Atmos, but, you know, it's not just about the ceiling or the surrounds, but it's actually being able to really discreetly space out a mix and then integrate it into the, you know, reverbs, where we can really start to think spatially about how we mix, and specifically about music, because when you're dealing with a 100-piece orchestra of material, you know, oftentimes what we're really struggling with as mixers is crashing all of this sonic material down into just what are essentially, you know, 6 speakers. So it's been a real revelation, because it really allows us to completely rethink the way we create a mix. And then how sound design and music can start to speak to each other more, because it isn't like things just have to live in one part of the mix, but we can actually really start to space things out and integrate them. So it's been a really, and it's ultimately our goal is to make Atmos kind of a day one process for every single movie we do here, not just the things that have multi tens of $1 million budgets. Because I do think, just like when I first started and 5.1, most things were stereo, and 5.1 was sort of this, it was like an add-on, but really now it's much harder for me to mix a movie in stereo than 5.1, because it's so integrated with the way I think about the sound design and the mix. And my goal with my team and I is that we want to make Atmos that for everything we do. So in the next couple of years, we want to, even if it's a tiny movie, we want to be using Atmos as kind of our regular go-to everyday way to approach the material. So that's kind of where we're at with it right now.
Yeah, I think there might be some customer or just consumer confusion about Atmos, because Apple says you can listen to it here, even though you can't get lossless via Bluetooth. But the spatial audio, it can be a confusing space. But I mean, to see it from the origin point like that, when you're mixing for theater and stuff like that, is just, it's mind blowing.
And I'm pretty hopeful about what's happening with spatial audio, even in it's pretty remarkable,
because it's a way better than just plain old stereo. The spatial audio space is way better. So it blew my mind first time actually using my AirPods Pro, and I was watching TV, and I was taking the headset. I was like, oh my God, and I have $1,000 speaker set up. I'm like, what? But
it's pretty remarkable. This is $100,000 speaker setup in this room. And, I mean, we've done a lot of A/B work and really listened, and it's pretty remarkable what we can do with just the psychoacoustic kind of data that Atmos provides, even if it's just going to a pair of earbuds. So I'm excited for that for the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, the work you do, all of the work you guys do is so interesting. So I have to ask, what's next? So what we can look forward to from all of you? Jemma, I want to start with you, since I hear you're working on a sci-fi thriller called Foe, and I'm curious what you can share with us about it, and give us a teaser or anything.
It was,
if you're allowed to.
Yes and no. I mean, I can talk a bit about that. That one's still it's a film by the director of a film called Lion. I'm not sure if you guys are aware, a film came out a few years ago. It's starring Saoirse Ronan and Paul Mescal, who's sort of the man of the moment, having been in After Sun and whatnot. It's been an incredible process, because the director and I have worked together for over 10 years, and so this isn't so much a post-production story, but we started talking about the film probably 2 years before it even got up. So it's been a wonderful process, all through lockdown, nutting out the sound and the tone of the film, sourcing the composers, because we actually had 3 composers on this film for different reasons. One person, a female composer who created the piano music that one of the characters is going to play. We really wanted it to be from a female voice. And then we have another composer who's an incredible Korean artist who has a very, very singular sound. So we just had to have that. But then, not having done film work before, we also worked with Oliver Coates, who's just done After Sun and many other films, and he's very much he's going to be the next man of the moment, I think. He's a close collaborator of Johnny Greenwood and Mika Levi, so he's quite incredible. So Foe we're nearly finished, not quite, but it should be coming out this year. I'm also very excited about Beau is Afraid, which is Ari Aster's new film, which was an interesting film to work on. During lockdown, I was working on several films in New York from Australia, so we generally had our meetings as they were on their way to dinner. But I'm super excited to see how that's perceived, because it's a pretty crazy film. That's all I'm going to say.
I mean, the trailer
it's going to blow
amazing.
people's minds. I don't even think I could give you a one-line synopsis. You can't describe it.
Ari's such a visual person. I can't wait.
It's going to blow people's minds. Other projects I'm working on are probably a bit early to talk about. So they're probably the 2 main ones that I'm excited to be coming out shortly. Yeah.
I can't wait for those. I want to go around the room if there's anybody else I can. I know don't want to break any NDAs or anything, but Forrest, is there anything that you can talk about that's coming up that you're allowed to share?
Yeah, yeah, I mixed the score for a film called How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which was by a good friend of mine, Gavin Brivik.
Okay.
And that's, that got picked up at, it's going to be released theatrically in April, I think. So I'm excited for that to hit the theaters. And
Nice.
it's like, I often get asked to do orchestral stuff, but like this was like fully synths, so I had this whole new set of challenges and very fun.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, that's what I'm really looking forward to.
Awesome. Well, can't wait for that one. Nathan, how about yourself? Anything coming up that
Yeah,
you're allowed to talk about?
yeah, sure. We got lots coming. We're kind of in the full swing of festival season. We just had one of our favorite movies that we've done, Joyland, which won Uncertain Regard at Cannes or won jury prize last year, and then was at Toronto, and now has just been doing the kind of victory lap of all the other
Yeah.
festivals. So it was just at Sundance. And it was shortlisted for the Academy Award. It didn't quite make it, but it's actually going to be coming out theatrically, and it's already playing in the UK and all over Europe. So we're excited about that. People are loving it. The Guardian just gave it a rave review in the UK. So check that out when it comes out. It's just a beautiful movie. With beautiful music actually by a young Pakistani musician. It's mostly synthesized based music. And I love the
Oh,
score in
wow.
it too, for those I know we're here talking about music. And then we've got two movies premiering at South by Southwest. One's called The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster, which is a kind of modern take on the Frankenstein story.
Hmm.
And then we have a documentary premiering called Citizen Sleuth, which is about it's about kind of citizen journalism and a woman who starts a podcast investigating a true crime kind of story. So that's coming, and then we've got more things coming after that. We just finished a movie with Chelsea Peretti directed. The music, SD Heim was the music supervisor, and Cool Kojak, who worked with Kesha and lots of other great pop artists, was actually the composer. So it's a really
Oh, wow.
cool hip score, and that's going to be coming. So keep an eye out for that. Yeah, and then we've got a big budget, big studio movie that's based on the life of Mother Cabrini, the first saint in America. It's like a big historical epic, and so that's going to be coming out. I don't have a date yet, but it's coming soon. So keep an eye out for that. And that one we did a big, giant, fantastic Atmos mix for. So,
Wow.
so I think that's all the stuff that's kind of in the near term, and yeah, a lot more coming after that. So,
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yvette, how about yourself? What anything you can talk about?
Well, Integrity of Joseph Chambers just came out theatrically and dropped on, you can watch it on Apple or, I think Amazon, so any of those. And I'm really proud of it, and I'm excited to see where that goes. Have a couple of other films that are kind of doing the festival circuit too. I have a short that I cut that played at Clermont-Ferrand and won the grand prize, the France grand prize, which was really cool. And looking ahead to what's next, going to do another feature soon. So can't quite,
Nice.
yeah, I
Yeah,
can't
can't
share
talk about it
any
yet.
yet, but yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Congratulations. Well, before I know we've been running for about an hour, but I do want to wrap everything up and go around the room one last time because I love a lot of young composers, a lot of young people, not just composers, but people in also all of your fields are entering the industry and getting started. And right now we're seeing the most crazy amount of change I think we've seen, at least since I've been here, everything shifting and changing with the ground moving under us. So I'm curious, what if you could give somebody like a young person entering this industry, whether it's in your field or just in general, one piece of advice, just like a one sentence, piece of advice, what would you give them? And just something that you wish you knew maybe when you started, or something that could guide them in the current state of the industry. So I don't know, maybe Forrest, if you want to kick us off.
That's a hard question. For me, I think like try to work with people you respect. Try to seek out the people that you respect and see how you can help them.
Yeah,
That
I
would
would,
be,
I agree. I was like what you can bring to the table, rather what you can take from the table. Like, I think that the collaborative spirit, if you come out with a not a selfish mind, yeah, no, I agree with that completely.
yeah.
Gemma, how about yourself?
I think if you're just starting out, I think it's great to find your peers, people who are at a similar stage to you. So maybe if you're a composer, ally yourself with some of the emerging short filmmakers. So then you can kind of nut it out together and make your initial mistakes. And, and hopefully if you've backed the right horse, the director might be someone who's really going places and will potentially take you along with them. But I just think it's great to find, don't always aim for the top of the hill at the beginning, but rather try and find people who are at the similar level to you and try and work come up together. I think that's a really great way to hone your craft.
Really good advice. Yeah,
100%. Last panel, someone said, "Don't compare your chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 30," and I thought that was like the best way to encompass that. Like, don't aim for the end of the road. Start, focus where you're at, and absolutely no say.
And be patient.
Yeah,
it's a
patience.
long
That's
road.
a big one. It's a long road.
Yeah.
Nathan, how about you? What piece of advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, I'm number one, I'm a strong believer in a creative education, and that doesn't have to be formal, though I think it can be. I think these days a lot of people are kind of down on school, but I think if you go into it with the right mindset of you're going to learn how to be creative rather than learn how to make movies or learn how to make sound, you can go on YouTube and figure out how to make sound, but learning how to think deeply, how to think creatively, how to have conversations and be able to interact with people and be collaborative and kind of develop ideas, that's I think the thing that has real currency. And I think there's never enough people that can contribute in that way. I'll hire people that can contribute in that way all day long. So I think that's one thing. And then I also think that everybody, I don't think there's one path to this. And in fact, everybody's going to have their own really idiosyncratic way that they're going to come at this. And I think that a lot of people will try to tell you like, oh, you got to do it this way or you got to do it that way. Everything that has worked for me in my career has been because I just didn't do it the way that someone said I should do it. And I think that ultimately has been why I landed where I did. And so that's my advice. And also just get used to working really, 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 really hard.
Yes.
Because if you don't think that's going to be part of it, then you probably should go do something else, because it's just the kind of the real truth of it. And hopefully you enjoy working hard, because that's
right.
also pretty essential.
And enjoy what you do. Yeah. If you're not having fun doing it, then don't do it.
Right. Yeah. Because then it doesn't really feel like that, like work. And that's true. I don't really feel, I work very, very hard, but I don't, most of the time it doesn't feel like work. It just feels good. So
no, I agree with that completely, because I went to film school, and even though film school is that bubble where you have that bubble, that creative bubble where you get to work and play and figure things out, because once you get into the real world, there's a very small chance you'll ever get back to being able to helm a film set again for a long time. So to take advantage of school, I think it's a safe space to learn. Yvette, how about yourself?
So I actually teach as an adjunct professor at USC's film school. So this is
nice.
a topic that comes up a lot with my students, and every single thing that everyone said. Number one, the idea of, stick with your peers. Don't be afraid to work at that level. The idea of using school as a safe space to experiment. I can't remember the last thing that Nathan said, but it was important. It was you said something, but it was all of this is stuff that comes up in my advice to them. And I think the other thing that I always advise them on is the significance of your reputation and how it precedes you from job to job. And, I think for me, I take my role as an educator really seriously, because I am potentially turning out a new generation of people who are going to be working in this industry alongside us, and wanting to make sure that they're coming out of it not only honing their craft and understanding, how to tell a story, but being really kind and good people who are going to be taking that with them into the industry. So I think that's really important. I always say that if I have the opportunity to hire someone who's maybe a little bit more green, but is really pleasant to be around and is a really hard worker, that's what you were saying, Nathan, that you will have to be a hard worker. I will always hire that person over someone who's maybe a little bit more experienced and who has a negative reputation or who's a difficult person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100% agree. And I also think that following on from that, I think maybe as composers or anyone doing those key roles, as they progress a little further into their career and have a few credits, be really careful about what jobs you take on as well, because scoring a film is a massive undertaking, and it's also as a composer you can very quickly get pigeonholed. So don't like, I have composer friends who've ended up just doing so much of a certain type of Australian television that I know, even though they're incredible, they're just not going to get hired on some of the really prestigious films I work on, because people are snobby. And you just have to be really careful about what you put your name to and what you invest your time in.
Yeah, that comes up a lot as well, and that's something that I tell them too, is don't be afraid to take steps back. Look, if you're doing that kind of work and you're happy doing it, fantastic. But if you get to a point where you're feeling unhappy and you want to make a transition, or it's not fulfilling you in any way, and I certainly got to that point with some of my work, I had to take a step back to move forward, and that's just the way it is. And to do that when you're younger, or when you realize it when you're younger, it's easier to do it earlier, before you have a family, before you have a partner, before you have all these other kind of logistical things that can weigh you down from being able to take those steps back. So don't feel like you're stuck just because this is a job you've been doing for 5 years, 10 years, whatever. Yeah,
100%. I mean, I agree with that completely, because the people talk in this industry, and if your reputation, you'll be known. But if you're an asshole, you'll be known as an asshole, and no one wants to work with assholes in this industry. And that's why you see these people continue. I mean, everyone's been talking about how you continually have a team that you work with over and over again for decades, and it's like, if you connect, it's very rare to find people that you really gel with, and if it's not broke, don't fix it. And if you enjoy being together and you actually are friends and are collaborators, I think we need to, I always love going back to the idea of that, because you do remember film school where you're with your friends, and that's the best thing. You're creating and you're in that safe space, but bring that into the professional side as well. But I want to
literally every single job I've ever done is just a line from one to the next to the next. There's no like secret. It's just literally word of mouth going back 150 projects. So
because everyone's going to ask, hey, do you know this person? You know someone who can, and then if you're great, they'll put your name out there, and that's how you get work.
What I find, I'm at the point in my career where like we'll have a movie and we'll have been recommended by 3 different people from 3 different groups of producers or projects, which I think is like, that's ultimately, that's the goal. So, because it is a very small world. So.
It is.
That's a small world indeed. Well, I want to thank everybody tonight for sitting down and talking. Morning for you, Jemma. I know you're over in Australia, but thank you Forrest, Jemma, Nathan, and Yvette for taking the time to share about your work and your expertise. It's been so fun and so informative. And I want to thank our friends at Impact 24 for helping co-produce and put this together for Film Music Media. And thank you all for watching. And if you missed any of the other panels in this series, head over to FilmMusicMedia.com and check out our YouTube channel and catch up with the other amazing panels of amazing storytellers that we get to talk to. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thanks for having us.